Hi, everyone. This is Michelle Harris, Senior Consultant in Instructional Coaching Group, where we believe in excellent instruction every day in every class for every student. Before we get started on this webinar, I would like to give you a little bit of information about where you can find more about all the work we do. If you go to instructionalcoaching.com, that's the best website to look on. All of the work we do and all of these webinars can be found there. Also, Jim writes a blog, radicallearners.com. On social media, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. And then if you want to reach out, that's my email and phone number. We're going to talk a little bit today about the basics of understanding and working with adults. So just as a couple reminders before we begin, when we talk about coaching, we're really talking about coaches who connect, collaborate, and deprivatize the great instruction that's happening. We want to make sure that coaches are not in evaluative roles at all, and we want coaching to build a bridge between what teachers and students are doing and plans that administrators have for school sites and district-wide plans as well. We believe that if coaching is done well, it may be the most effective intervention designed for human performance. That quote comes directly from an article that Atul Gawande wrote for the New Yorker probably close to 10, 12 years ago now. So I want to start today when we talk about the complexities of helping and working with adults with just a couple funny videos that kind of illustrate what our approaches to coaching might look like. When we think about coaching, we're really talking about a helping relationship. We're talking about a goal or multiple goals are being set through that relationship. But more importantly, we want there to be sustainability. That means that as coaches, we want to work really hard to help spread that healthy virus of coaching throughout our buildings and lead to long-term change in both students and teachers. Therefore, we have to make sure that we're not enabling. Instead, we are helping in a way that leads to commitment on the teacher's part. There are a couple ways we could do this. Here's one way. So you have a helping situation, you have a goal, which is to get to the bottom of the stairs. Now let's watch a different way.
Come here, Daisy. Oh, you almost got it. Oh, it's okay. Come on. Simon will show you. See? Oh. See? Simon, go show her again. Go show her. Oh my God, I might cry. That's so funny. Oh, you almost got it. Oh, come on. Daisy. Come on. Come on. Oh, sweetie. Simon's got you. Come on. Yeah! Yay! You're almost down. Come on. Oh. Good girl. Yay! Good job.
So you can see the same goal, the getting down the stairs, and the same thing, a helping relationship. However, you notice that Simon has a lot more perseverance and patience and empathy than the cat did. So when we think about coaching and we think about long-term sustainability, we want to be a little bit more dog than cat in our approach to teachers. In other words, we want to remember what it's like to be teaching full-time in the classroom. We want to remember what it's like to be a beginner. We want to be patient and kind in our approach. We also want to think about some of the complexities of helping adults. So we're going to talk about that next. What do we mean by the complexities of helping adults? We know that helping for change, and we are in constant change cycles in education, can be both exhausting and exhilarating. And that's a quote from an actual coach in Franklin County, Georgia, Tracy, who said, it's so hard getting through it, but then once you get through it, when you see the change in students and the change in teachers, it's so exhilarating. And that's very true. We know this, that helping is extremely complicated. Teachers are complicated professionals working with complicated young human beings. And in order to really get work done and to work in a way that honors that, we have to know all the complications of helping and understand that oftentimes resistance is not a personal thing. So let's talk a little bit about change. When we talk about change, we borrow change theory from a couple different sources, but one of the ones we keep going back to is James Prohaska and the book he wrote in 1994 called Changing for Good. Now, probably nothing in this book is revolutionary anymore, although it may have been in 1994. Prohaska and his buddies talk about a change cycle. They talk about contemplation, that first you have to think about the change. You have to notice the change. Then you have to prepare for what you're going to do to make the change. You actually have to do the change, keep doing it long enough for it to be maintained, and then terminate. But what Prohaska wrote about that is particularly relevant for coaching and classrooms is this idea of pre-contemplation. And in his book, he said that a little more than 90% of us are actually pre-contemplative about a change that needs to happen in our lives. In other words, we don't even notice it needs to happen. And if you don't notice a change needs to be made, you're less likely to make that change. We know that most of us attack, attempt, and abandon change multiple times before we ever get into the maintenance and termination phase. Typically 4 to 5 times on average, we try something new. So also we know that in order to truly change for good, we have to address pre-contemplation. If teachers don't know a change needs to happen, they are not likely to think one does. Here is a video of Jim talking to Aisha. Aisha has changed grade levels and is somewhere in between pre-contemplation and contemplation about her warm-ups. Let's watch Jim give her a quick piece of data that moves her straight into contemplation.
I wanted to talk about my warm-up.
What are your thoughts?
I don't know why warm-ups are supposed to be quick. 5-10 minutes. And my warm-ups seem to go on a little longer than it should.
I timed it.
Please don't tell me.
8:27 to 8:54. 27 minutes.
That's not good. And I think it's because they struggle with, I thought it was something was so simple in my mind. This is going to take them a couple minutes.
Right.
It didn't happen. I flopped.
No, you didn't flop, but it was a lot of time.
So you can see when Jim gives her the piece of data, he simply tells her how much time it took for her warm-up, 27 minutes. And so oftentimes if people don't want to change, it's not that they can't see the solution, it's that they can't see the problem to begin with. Another example of this was a Corwin Press study that was done a few years ago, where Corwin Press asked teachers in a secondary school to give a prediction of how many questions they asked of students. And these were questions that had to do with content. The average number of questions most teachers said was 15. They were also asked how many questions do you think students ask of you? And these are content related questions, not procedural questions like, can I sharpen my pencil or can I go to the bathroom? And the average number was around 10. And then a team of people went in and observed each one of these teachers. And what they found was, on average, teachers asked 51 questions and students asked fewer than 2. So you can see, just looking at that simple bar graph, the difference between where our reality is and where we think it is usually pretty big. If you're working with a teacher and the teacher says to you about a teaching strategy, I tried that once or twice or 3 times, but I don't do it anymore, just remember that that teacher is exactly where research says she or he should be, because oftentimes we try things 4 or 5 times before we actually do them. The simple truth about change is that people often don't know they need help or need to change because they honestly don't know what it looks like when they do what they do. If you look at the webinar that we have on Impact Cycle, you will see that one of our big pushes is to use video. This helps with change. It also helps with the concept of pre-contemplation. Once you watch the video, you're no longer in pre-contemplation because you are able to see, quite possibly, the changes that need to happen. The next complexity of helping is around identity. And by identity, we borrow from the work of the Harvard Negotiation Project. Doug Stone, Sheila Heen, and their colleagues, when they did this work, they say that our understanding of how good and competent we are is frequently tied into our success or failure at work. In other words, as a teacher, as an educator, quite often our identities are wrapped up in how well we think we teach. Therefore, if someone comes in and tells us we're not doing what we think we're doing, oftentimes that feels like a failure. And in our minds, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are typically biased slightly in our favor. We're more hero than villain. And so through these stories, we created our identity. If someone tells us other than what we think, oftentimes that can feel very personal. I liken it to what happened to me once in a small regional airport. It looked a little bit like this. We were all packed in, and there was a pair of a grandpa and a grandma traveling with their 2 small grandchildren. They were flying on standby and their names got called, so they quickly jetted over to the desk to pick up their tickets, leaving their 3 and 4-year-old grandchildren on the floor playing at my feet. The second the grandparents left, one of the grandchildren socked the other child in the arm. Before I even knew it, I was down on the ground talking to them about in my teacher voice about how we don't hurt people. And then I was like, oh, this is none of my business. Oftentimes as educators, we are so entrenched in this work, we don't even realize how much of our identity it is. When we go in as coaches and try to speak the hard truth about something we see in the classroom, the hard truth is not going to get accepted if the teacher does not see that in his or her mind. Also, coaching can never be seen as a deficit model because of identity. It has to be seen as a culture of we can all improve, and that culture has to be cultivated through coaching. If teachers think that coaches only work with other teachers who are struggling, they're not going to ask for coaching because of identity. The simple truth about identity is that people often take it very personally when we talk about their practice. The third complexity of helping is one we call thinking. And our theory around this comes from Thomas Davenport and the book he wrote called Thinking for a Living. In this book, Davenport talks about how, as thinking workers, we need autonomy. In other words, if someone else does the thinking for us, we will resist. If any of you have ever not been on a curriculum adoption committee and then the materials were delivered to your desk, oftentimes what I hear is, I never would have picked this. Sometimes that's because we don't have the autonomy around the thinking that goes into the hours of time it takes to pick curriculum. Therefore, as coaches, we need to remember that the onus for the thinking, the autonomy, falls squarely in the lap of the teacher. Jim wrote an excellent article about this not too long ago that you can access through Educational Leadership that talks about the importance of autonomy in thinking. And the simple truth is, if we don't give the thinking worker that we're working with, that we're coaching, the autonomy around thinking, they will resist. I want to be really clear that oftentimes resistance in education looks a lot like compliance. People saying, yes, I'll do that thing you told me to do. And then the minute you leave, they're back to doing what they were doing before. So when we talk about resistance, that looks different depending on people's personalities and depending on a lot of other factors. So resistance doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks like compliance. The next complexity of helping is one we call status. And status basically means that when we're in helping situations, they are intrinsically unbalanced. In Edgar Schein's book, Helping, he talks a lot about how oftentimes when we're in a helping situation, if we are the helper, we put the helpee one down. We put ourselves in a parent or adult role and the helpee in a child or a student role. When we are adults helping each other, the person who is the helpee is constantly, either consciously or subconsciously, asking themselves the question, am I getting the status I deserve from the helper? And if they aren't getting the status they deserve, or they don't believe they're getting the status they deserve, they will take that status back. So in his book, Edgar Schein talks about equilibrating a conversation. And by that, he means we have to work really hard to make sure that the person who is being helped feels like an equal, that we sit shoulder to shoulder with them instead of across a long table or in a tall, throny chair, that we lean in and listen more than we speak, that we acknowledge what they're saying, and that we are a witness to the good when they do have epiphanies or when they're talking about something that we know is new learning for them. Also, just try and remember as a coach that when you're in a helping situation, it's going to be intrinsically unbalanced. The person who's being helped might have a temporary loss of status or self-esteem because they either don't know what to do next or are unable to do next what they need to do next. Oftentimes this happens in situations where someone moves grade levels or moves content areas, and they may not be a brand new teacher and they may have taught successfully or effectively for many years, but all of a sudden they're in a new situation. Therefore, they might need some help. Just remember that a temporary loss of self-esteem is something that can weigh pretty heavily on people's minds and hearts. So we want to make sure that if people feel one down and they start to resist help, we do all we can to help equilibrate that conversation. The last complexity of helping is around motivation. We borrow a lot of our motivation theory from Daniel Pink's book that's been around for quite a while called Drive. Daniel Pink in his book Drive says that goals that people set for themselves and that they can think through them themselves and that are devoted to attaining mastery are usually helpful. Healthy. On the other hand, goals imposed by others, such as quarterly reports, standardized test scores, and sales targets, can sometimes have dangerous side effects. Daniel Pink talks about people needing 3 things when they set goals for themselves. Autonomy, there's that word again, that it needs to be a goal that they can master, and there needs to be purpose to that goal. Again, if you go to the webinar on the impact cycle, you will see that we have added all 3 of those elements into our identify questions and into the work we do around setting a goal. We need to make sure that we are trying to intrinsically motivate teachers by looking at student-focused goals. Most teachers are motivated by what students can and can't do. Therefore, it doesn't just feel like one more person coming into a classroom telling a teacher something they can do differently. The simple truth about motivation is that we just aren't motivated by other people's goals. Oftentimes, we are motivated by other people's success, but we need to have some thinking and some autonomy around our own goals, and they need to be masterable. That being said, when we set goals with teachers, when we coach, we want to make sure the goals are small enough to master so we can celebrate small successes before we move on to something bigger. So how can we help in a way that impacts people, but also acknowledges these complexities? Just because working with teachers is difficult and working with adults is complex doesn't mean that we should throw our hands up and say, well, it's too hard. We want to make sure we're still helping, but acknowledging those complexities. We also want to move out of a place of compliance and into a place of commitment. We want teachers understanding the value of coaching. We want teachers to say, when I was coached, my students improved, and so did I. We also want to move from a culture of talk into a culture of action. Oftentimes in education, we do a lot of talking around what needs to happen. We propose moving into actually doing what needs to happen. And through the partnership principles, we believe that can happen. We have changed a lot of things in the 2+ decades that we've been working around instructional coaching. But one thing that hasn't changed at all are the partnership principles. The first partnership principle is equality. We believe that equality means everyone matters the same. Not everyone is going to have the same title, have the same number of years, or have the same buckets of expertise, but everyone matters the same. And there's a huge difference as a coach between going in as an expert and going in as someone that has expertise. We want to value the expertise of the teacher, value their knowledge of their students and of their classroom, and listen and learn first before we talk and teach in a coaching relationship. The next partnership principle is one of choice. We believe firmly in teacher's choice, full well knowing that choice is extremely nuanced. We don't mean that everyone has a choice to do whatever they want or to be unprofessional. We say that choice means we're firm on the standard and flexible on the way to get there. We say that the opposite of caring about other people and loving other people as fellow human beings is control. Therefore, we may watch a lesson and have 6 ideas for the teacher, or we may know exactly what we think they should work on. If they choose something different, we want to be able to give them that choice. Also, when we're offering up choices around instructional strategies, we want to be careful to offer some choice, not too much choice. Barry Schwartz says in The Paradox of Choice that too much is just as paralyzing as no choice at all. We kind of liken this to going to dinner here. If you know what that menu looks like, you know that most people, when they go to Cheesecake Factory, just order the same thing every single time. The menu is huge. Therefore, it's pretty much like having no choice at all. We also want to be really, really clear when we talk about choice that no one has the choice to be unprofessional. The very definition of being a professional is always learning and growing. If you took your mom to a surgeon because she was having debilitating migraines, and the surgeon says, well, in the 1600s, we just drilled holes in people's heads to let the spirits out, you would absolutely fire that surgeon. You would not go with them. We expect our doctors, our lawyers, our scientists constantly to get better, and we should be able to do that ourselves as education workers. The next of the partnership principles is voice. And voice is very important for numerous reasons. Shane Lopez, who wrote the book Making Hope Happen, also worked for the Gallup organization. And when he was working for the Gallup organization, he did a poll on voice. And basically, he asked workers all over the nation of all different varieties and types, do you feel listened to at work? And do your opinions matter? And do your superiors make decisions based on what you say? And when those results all rolled in, What they found out was at the very bottom of the heap was teachers. Teachers feel the least listened to. Now, we know that being listened to is healing, that listening to others creates relationship. Margaret Wheatley tells us that everyone has a story and everyone wants to tell it in order to connect to each other. We know that as human beings, we're wired for connection. If teachers feel the least listened to, the least heard, then we have to think that students as well are struggling with voice. When we coach, we give the gift of listening to a teacher. We give the gift of asking a teacher, what do you think? What will work best for your students in your situation, in your class? And listening to those teachers heals them. We do most of this through the structure of dialogue. Dialogue is very, very important. It's also complex. We know we're living in a very anti-dialogical age. It's not just politically that we don't listen to each other. On ESPN, sports broadcasters talk over each other. And as far as reality TV is concerned, if we don't like the way someone acts, looks, or talks, we just vote them off the island. And so we are probably not doing the best job of being good examples for students as far as what dialogue can look like and sound like. Through coaching and through a dialogical structure, we can do that. We borrow most of our theory around dialogue from Paulo Freire and the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Jim also references the Bohm book called On Dialogue. When we talk about dialogue, the word dialogue literally means thinking together. So dialogue means every voice is being heard. In a coaching situation, both the teacher is talking and the coach is talking. And when the coach shares, they do so in a dialogical way. According to Freire, 5 requirements must be there for dialogue to happen. We must have humility. That doesn't mean we think less of ourselves. It means we think of ourselves less. Humility means we go in knowing that the teacher has just as much to share as we do, and that they bring with them expertise the same way we do as coaches. When Freire talks about faith, he means that we have faith that through this structure of dialogue, we will help solve this problem of practice, that we will move students forward in a way that we may not have before. We also have hope when we leave the dialogue that we're better off for having had it, and we are on a road to creating a solution for a problem of practice. In true dialogue, critical thinking happens. And when Freire talks about love, what he really means is caring about the other person as a human being and treating them as an equal. Dialogue is never about being right, it's about doing right. The other gift we can give our teachers as coaches is the gift of reflection. Oftentimes as educators, our reflective moments happen when we're driving to and from work, or in the shower, or when we wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. What we would propose is helping teachers become reflective practitioners by giving them time during the school day to reflect out loud and on their own. We say true reflection is not just looking back at what happened, but also learning how to look at and change things in the moment and look ahead for what I might do next time I teach that lesson, or tomorrow based on what I saw today. Praxis is a word for reflection in action. This too comes from Pedagogy of the Oppressed and the work that Freire has done. When we enable praxis for teachers, they have a chance to take ideas and explore, prod, stretch, and recreate those ideas and make them their own. An example of praxis might be something like this. If you are working with a teacher and the teacher has told you that she wants to set an engagement goal for her students. Right now, she's just working on carpet time. This is an elementary teacher. She's just working on carpet time. You set a goal around engagement and you bring out the behaviors of engagement to be that students are participating in talking structure like think, pair, share, to use content area vocabulary to talk about the question that the teacher's thrown out. Praxis might sound something like this. These are fourth graders. I want my fourth graders to do more than just think, pair, share. I'd like them to practice jot pair sharing. And then I'd like to collect the sticky notes where they jot as some sort of formative assessment. That's the teacher exploring, prodding, and stretching an idea to make it his or her own. So when those students sit on the carpet and learn how to engage in a dialogue structure, they're doing it in a way that the teacher knows is best for them. The last of the partnership principles is something called reciprocity. And in this case, reciprocity truly means when one teaches to learn. The joy of coaching is that you will learn as much from the teacher as he or she will learn from you. True reciprocity circles back around to equality and humility in that as a coach, my job is not to impart my vast knowledge to every teacher in my system or building. Instead, it is to engage in dialogue and equal conversations where I work hard to equilibrate and assist the teacher in doing something that they may not have already been able to do without me. The 7 partnership principles are seen on your screen: equality, choice, voice, dialogue, reflection, praxis, and reciprocity. In so many ways, we have seen partnership give life to people's innate love of learning. Oftentimes, we see a teacher that the spark for why they got into teaching has been reignited through the coaching cycle and through a coach truly treating them as an equal. We want to remember that in these times of change, which are constant in education, the learners will inherit the earth, while the learned will find themselves beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. That being said, I just want to walk you through 3 more big ideas that align with the work that we've done around the complexities of helping and partnership, just to shore up a few more ideas about instructional coaching and why it's complex. The first idea is something we call experience changes beliefs. Oftentimes, when we're coaching, we try to talk people into believing that coaching works or that this strategy might work, etc. What we have found in our research is that sometimes people can be persuaded by our words, but oftentimes what truly changes people's minds is when they see it actually working for themselves. That being said, as a coach, if people are resistant, try not to take it personally. Instead, try to start with the coalition of the willing, people who are willing to work with you, and have them talk about coaching. Have them share what's worked for them and how it's made a difference for their students. Oftentimes, coaches see huge success when they coach in teams. Therefore, some of the people that are resistant are being coached in teams, and as they see their team members, students improving, oftentimes they too are willing to take a chance. The second big idea around coaching is something we call informed adaptive response. This is basically just kind of a fancy way of saying one size fits one. In other words, coaching, if we could give it a color, would really be gray. That means every person is at a different place, and we meet each teacher exactly right where they are when we go to coach them. We have structures and systems set up for you as far as coaching, but also know, depending on the teacher, depending on the students, every coaching cycle you engage in will look and feel different. When we meet people right where they are, we're saying to them, I see you, I hear you, and I'm going to move you forward from where you are. The next video is a beautiful example of how meeting people right where they are doesn't change what we're doing with them, and it doesn't lower standards. In fact, we would argue that it helps improve the work we're doing.
Hey,
running through my thin gray hair. Though I don't have any plans to live, I'm not going anywhere. The light should have seen what's coming. Don't know why I'm surprised.
When the best of us steps up, our name stands a little taller. All for him.
When we meet people right where they are, we make sure that we are honoring where their place, and also saying to them, let's move forward with this and see how successful we can be. The last big idea that I'm going to share with you is that doing good for others is its own reward. When we enter into coaching with humility, we truly are there to do good for others. And we also help people succeed that might not ordinarily succeed in their work. Thank you so much for listening to the webinar. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at instructionalcoachinggroup.com. You can reach me, Michelle Harris, at michelle@instructionalcoaching.com, or any of the other people who work for our organization. Thanks so much.